In the relentless march towards a complete and final demystification of all things, where reason has superseded ritual, blood has emerged as the ultimate taboo. Desperate efforts to detach its symbolic reality, including but not limited to its association with heredity, with race, from its biological reality, betray the atavistic combination of reverence and horror that is shared by mystics and, though they are loath to admit it, materialists alike. It is believed that, in the evolution of terrestrial life, the appearance of blood is a relatively belated phenomenon. The esoteric meaning of this development is one of separation from the infinite consciousness. Just as man requires sensory organs to parse the external world precisely because it is external, other, the presence of blood is to be viewed in a similar fashion, as a vestigial residue of the schism between the individual and the cosmic body. The relationship of an individual to his blood is that of a microcosm to a macrocosm. It is the deep intuition of this truth that is at the core of the Aryan obsession with genealogy, heritage, and racial purity. The corruption of the bloodline signifies, in a very profound sense, the weakening of the already tenuous link between above and below. The presence, across multiple geographically distant cultures, of the belief that the blood was the vehicle of the soul, or pneuma, attests to its much older origin. Born of an essentially naturalistic observation of blood as a life-sustaining fluid, this belief is echoed in the idea of the race soul, the conviction that that which is passed on cannot be reduced to mere genetic material. That part of that which is sustained is the memory of some non-contingent and primordial entity. The notion of genetic or blood memory has been rehabilitated in recent years in the same way that most ancient beliefs are rehabilitated, namely by rephrasing them in Darwinian terms. However, the meaning intended here is one of a memory of blood that lies beyond all causality. The materialist worldview has sought to reduce the meaning of blood to its corporeal aspect alone in an effort to conceal its essentially dual nature. There are two streams of being that express themselves in the blood, each with entirely different trajectories, and it is the dominance of one or the other that determines the character, the destiny of the individual. First, the individualized blood does not flow, it circulates. Only to the untrained eye does an orbiting mass appear to move freely. In reality, it is entirely enslaved by whichever body happens to exert the strongest attraction. Circular paths render notions of beginning and end meaningless. From an eonic time perspective, there is only stasis. This hints at the Indo-Aryan concept of samsara, defined as the cycle of aimless drifting, wandering, or mundane existence, in which the unenlightened soul is imprisoned. Liberation from this cycle can only be achieved through the realization that what the individualized blood is orbiting is the samsaric self. The primacy of the circling corporeal aspect of blood in our perception, that which is manifested in the tendency towards individualism, is a result of concentric metaphysical currents that are ontologically prior. This last idea, though it may be formulated in various ways, is central to all ascetic teaching. In Danté's Inferno, hell is portrayed as a series of concentric circles. In the seventh of these, a river of boiling blood, the Phlegathon, located in Hades according to the ancient Greeks, is said to more and more decline its bed until it reunites itself. Note that Hades is associated with chthonic spirituality, which, according to the traditionalist interpretation, represents an involution in contrast to the primordial, Hyperborean cults of the Golden Age. Therefore, the descending and circuitous course of the Phlegathon mirrors, on a microcosmic level, the parallel motion of the individualized blood that was the original cause of the soul's perdition, as well as, on a macrocosmic level, the downward trend of humanity as a whole. Tellingly, the seventh circle is reserved for, among others, those who, possessed by a depraved passion, dissipated their goods for the sheer wanton lust of wreckage and disorder, and inside a barren desert, sodomites are condemned to run in circles for all eternity, a clear allegory of the concentric interlocking of individual decadence within the samsaric cycle mentioned earlier. The second aspect of blood that we will discuss could be termed linear. If the circular type is the one that dominates the individualist, then the linear type, in contrast, is the aspect that speaks through the true man and woman of race, the one that imbues the aristocratic and dynastic principles with a deeply felt striving towards infinity. The linear aspect of the blood, being in tune with the cosmic pulse that propels all life forward, is consequently the same as time itself. In a sense, it is the voice through which the race soul speaks. This confluence within the individual body of the circular and linear aspects is what lies beneath the universal practices of blood sacrifice, and more specifically, hematomancy, or blood divination. All divination in the classical world served not to foresee into the distant future, as is commonly thought, but rather as a means to tease the Kairos, the opportune moment at which to perform a given action, from the chronos, or the thread of irreversible time. The individual life is the incidental occurrence of a superior stream of being, and it is through probing the intersection, located in the blood, of the physical and the metaphysical planes that the hematomancer derived his insight. Interestingly, the root of the Greek word kairos is etymologically linked with both archery and weaving, denoting respectively the moment in which an arrow may be fired with sufficient force to penetrate a target, and that in which the shuttle could be passed through threads on the loom. As it so happens, threading a needle is an initiatory symbol shared across multiple Hyperborean traditions, from the Indo-Aryan Upanishads to the Attic myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. Quoting one interpretation that reinforces what we just mentioned, threading a needle is a symbol of passing through a gateway to the sun and escaping through the cosmos. It also has the same meaning as the arrow piercing the center of the target. In this context, the thread may be regarded as the link between the infernal, terrestrial, and cosmic levels. The thread must be, in all things, followed back to its source, because it is linked to a main central point, often depicted as the sun. Therein are profound analogies for the exalted purpose of man in relation to the race soul, when the circular, individualized blood is subservient to its linear aspect. The individual who harnesses the circling motion of his blood not as an end in itself, but as a means to actualize the Kairos out of the stream of latent potentialities of the Chronos, will follow the thread back to its source and be released from the concentric bondage of samsara. Following this line of reasoning, the convergence of both aspects of the blood in a single individual could be represented visually by a circle traversed by a horizontal line. Setting aside the obvious allusion to threading a needle, this image also happens to correspond to the alchemical symbol for salt, a substance that features prominently in Hermetic literature, and to which a number of meanings have been ascribed. Its properties as a food preservative and a mummifying agent led to the connection of salt with immortality, incorruptibility, and revivification. Plutarch noted that, as the soul, our most divine element, preserves life by preventing dissolution of the body, just so salt controls and checks the process of decay. Also, the extraction of salt from seawater, the latter of which is associated in both the ancient Egyptian and Greek mythologies with the giant serpent Typhon, symbolizes the primordial conquest of the demonic element represented by the sea serpent by its antithesis, since salt, as a desiccant, is the opposite of water. This reveals a hidden alchemical meaning to the mythical slaying of the great serpent by Apollo, the central deity of the Hyperborean pantheon. Indeed, the Hermetic tradition holds that salt, as a byproduct of the neutralization reaction between an acid and a base, symbolizes the synthesis of the active and passive principles, or divinity and matter, and the transmutation of one form into another, more sublime form of being. Writer Margaret Visser remarked that salt, once isolated, is white and glittering. You win it by freeing it from the water with the help of fire and the sun, and it dries out flesh. Dryness, in the pre-Socratic cosmic system which still informs our imagery, is always connected with fire, heat, and light. The aforementioned drying out of the flesh is to be understood, apart from the obvious reference to mummification, in a symbolic sense. It is an allusion to the overcoming of death through the sublimation of the ego side of the blood in favor of its race side. In short, we can clearly see that there is a deep affinity between the esoteric meaning of salt and that which arises from the primacy, within the body, of the linear aspect of blood. Indeed, a single principle is revealed in both cases that can be summed up by a passage from the Book of Revelation, whose symbolism should be obvious considering what we just mentioned. To him that overcometh I will give a white stone. The notoriously cryptic texts of the Hermetic tradition often conceal truths that, despite the jumble of astrological, metallurgical symbols in which they are cloaked, are of an essentially metaphysical nature. For example, the Museum Hermeticum, first published in 1625, contains the following passage. When you know how to extract the metal from its body by purification, the destruction of the first Mars, you must dissolve that mercury in its own blood, out of which it was made before it became fixed. And you have then nourished and dissolved the true lion with the blood of the green lion. For the fixed blood of the red lion has been made out of the volatile blood of the green lion, hence they are of one nature. And the unfixed blood again renders that which is volatile fixed, and the fixed blood in its turn fixes that which is volatile, as it was before the solution. An astute observer will detect that this text is more creation myth than it is chemistry. We shall see that it is, beneath its convoluted terminology, emphatically relevant to the topic at hand, essentially describing an initiatory process that leads to an internal transformation. Dissolving mercury in its own blood is yet another illustration of the central principle we are trying to elucidate, namely the need to dissolve the circular blood of the individual into the superior stream of being from whence it came, that which is an expression of the race soul, as it was before the separation, that is, before it became fixed in its current form. The true lion, the individual in its pure, unconditioned state, is revealed by the blood of the green lion, the latter of which being a metaphor for vitriol, a powerful acid that dissolves all matter except gold. Hence we are left with a picture, on the one hand, of the purification of one stream of being by another, of that which has attained form by that which is volatile, formless, and on the other, and this ties into the hierarchical relationship between the Kairos and the Chronos, of rendering immanent what is by nature transcendent, of fixing or actualizing in this plane what belongs to another plane. We see that the Hermetic process of transmuting one substance into gold, or revealing the gold inherent in that substance, corresponds to the esoteric meaning mentioned earlier of the isolation of salt from seawater. Both are variations on the themes of threading the needle or returning to the sun. Another insight into the twofold nature of blood can be found in Euripides' Ion. There, Creusa, the daughter of the Athenian king, reveals to an elderly man the two wildly different effects produced by the Gorgon's blood. The one works death, the other heals disease. This acquires an additional meaning when combined with an earlier passage that can easily be interpreted as an allegory of the inner struggle between the two aspects of blood. If thou delay, thy life is lost, for when beneath one roof two foes are met, the one must perish. The most revealing account of the dual aspect of the Gorgon's blood, however, is found in a 2nd century compendium of Greek myths and legends known as the Bibliotheca, in which it is said that Asclepios had received from Athene the blood that had coursed through the Gorgon's veins, the left side portion of which he used to destroy people, but that on the right he used for the preservation, which is how he could revive those who had died. The authors mention that the healing or revivifying aspect of the blood was drawn from the right side, whereas the destructive aspect came from the left, is anything but arbitrary. According to ancient Eastern traditions, the right was associated with good omens due to the belief in it being the spiritual side in contrast to the left, worldly side. This belief also found its way into the Christian canon, where numerous passages make use of left and right symbolism in this exact way, including Matthew 6:2, "Let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth," and notably John 21:6, "Cast the net on the right side of the ship, and ye shall find." Thus, the aspect of blood that revives the dead, the right side, as mentioned in the Bibliotheca, that which leads through the straight gate and narrow way, is strongly suggestive of what we mean by the linear aspect as opposed to the left circular aspect, the latter corresponding to the ego and worldly impulses. As the blood weakens, as the rush of the superior stream is reduced to a trickle, Ariadne's thread slips through our fingers and can no longer be followed back to the source. Blood is a microcosm of the universe. The impulses that have led to an involution with respect to its symbolic meaning, unifying power, and overall quality are a function of an overarching decline affecting all aspects of the human condition. By internalizing the Christian humanist dogma that monopolized all blood sanctity within the body of Christ, we effectively signed a Mephistophelian pact, for the sanctification of his blood demanded the desanctification of that which flows below. In truth, there is only a short leap between that secularization and the rationalistic conception of blood that, by stripping it of its metaphysical content, renders it a sterile and meaningless possession. And yet, Danté teaches us, the way out of the ninth circle is through the blood, as mentioned in the closing lines of the Inferno. A place there is below, as far receding as the tomb extends, which not by sight is known, but by the sound of a small rivulet that there descendeth through chasm within the stone, with course that winds about and slightly falls. The guide and I into that hidden road now entered, to return to the bright world, till I beheld through a round aperture some of the beauteous things that heaven doth bear. Thence we came forward to re-behold the stars.